Today we are going to go into this chart of mine, Spider-Man, and I'm going to take you page by page, bar by bar, note by note, chord by chord, inside the score, and show you all the decisions I made, and we can discuss if they were good decisions, bad decisions, if we would do them differently now. Let you see this chart, warts and all. So let's jump into it. The song is Spider-Man. You probably have heard it. It's pretty famous, lots of versions of it out there, from Michael Bublé to the Ramones to the Simpsons movie. Written by Webster and Harris. Now the song follows a minor blues form with the addition of a bridge in there. So we are attacking this chart as a 60s, 70s crime TV, spy movie, over-the-top extravaganza. We have a bright tempo. There's lots going on. The challenge when you're arranging a song that has so little going on in it, because this song is basically like a ditty. It's like a jingle. So how do we make it exciting and keep it from getting boring? This chart is over 5 minutes long. Well, we have some tricks up our sleeve that help us accomplish this. I want to pause for a second and just let you know that we're going to go through this and I'm going to point out tons of stuff here. But if this is something that you like, I've created a score analysis pack that you can purchase. And what it is it's a study score like this, a concert study score, but then another one that has tons of annotations and markups in it, where I explain what's going on every page. There's about 6 things on every page that I point out. Then I also give you these audio files where you have the track, but you also have the track minus the horns, and then you have the stems of each section of horns, so you can really pull it apart and listen to what's going on in the trombones versus the saxes versus the trumpets. And what's great is I also include a Logic file and a MIDI file, so you can load these into any digital audio workstation, load in the files. You'll have all the correct measure and tempo changes and meter changes, and also these markers that correspond to what's going on each page. And with all that, you can really absorb the material, I think, a lot better than if it was just MP3s, because you can loop sections and solo sections and really get to hear what the difference is between the different voicings or the different approaches to each section. The reason I want to get that out of the way is because when we have something like this, where we have a chord that's voiced out, each note of this melody is voiced out in a chord. In that score analysis pack, I tell you the names of the chords, and that makes it a little easier to analyze what's going on. Right now, we'll just do it on the fly. In a lot of these, they'll say, if you don't know the song, just pause the video and go listen to it and then come back. And I don't think anyone on planet Earth has ever done that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just play you this page, and then we can start dissecting it. So our tonal center is a G minor. So we're going to start, we have the melody, it's basically an arpeggio starting on G. We're going to voice it with a G minor 6 chord. That means it has an E natural in it. Minor 6 chord is such a great chord for this crime vibe, this film noir vibe. You have the B flat, which is the 3rd of G minor, but you have that E natural. So you have a tritone interval in there. That almost makes it sound like a dominant chord, but also a minor chord at the same time. So it's a very distinct and unique sound. It's perfect for this vibe. G, B flat, D, and then on the bottom, we're going G, E flat, D. So we end on the D on both notes. Now the E flat is a 7 or a 9 chord, and then the D, altered 7 chord. Now a lot of times you won't have a root in the altered 7 chord because you'll probably have the flat 9 and the sharp 9, maybe even both. So it's kind of weird to have the D in there, but the D is in the melody, so it's fair game. Then we move over here, and as the melody descends, our root movement moves downward as well. Parallel motion, the kids call it. So what I do here is I use these chromatic chords going down. I go from a B flat minor 7 to an A7 sharp 5. To this chord, it's an A flat minor with a major 7. This chord is also very film noir, very Henry Mancini. Between the root and the major 7, that's a half note interval, and it's very unsettling. Even when you add a major 3rd to it, it cleans it up a little bit, but it's still pretty dissonant. But then when you add the minor 3rd, it makes the chord very unique and devious. What's interesting is that we then end up on a G minor. And when we talk about arranging, this is one of the things that's confusing. Usually we have our target note, like where we are beginning. but then we have to reverse engineer how we're getting there. We don't usually move linearly to it. A lot of times we start on the chord and then work backwards to figure out how we're going to get into it. So that was partly how I was thinking and how I arrived at this A flat minor with a major 7. And usually you'll come from the 5 of the chord. So we would come from a D7, or even an A flat 7 would work great. That's a tritone substitution, and that's a great way to resolve to the G minor. But by using the minor major 7, it really is an interesting sound, because we come to the end of this phrase, it almost sounds like this is where we are starting the song, and then we just slide a half step down into this riff, and it's pretty cool. Okay, so now we're at the G here. What we have going on here is throughout the song, it's alternating between a G minor and a G minor major 7. That's very classic. It's sort of a James Bond thing. We have this chromatic line cliche over here in the lead alto. We have this stop time figure here against this guitar riff, which is a really fun to play and cool guitar riff. So and the trombones are basically doing the same thing. Then over here in the trumpets, I construct what we call a pyramid. I can explain what's going on, but you can just look at it and get the idea. Lead trumpet is playing the full line, while the second trumpet stops short and holds their note out. Third trumpet stops on this note and holds it out. It doesn't have to be one instrument group. It doesn't have to be trumpets. You could spread it out. One of these could be guitar. One of them could be piano. Two of them could be saxes. No real rules about that. So let's move on to the next section. This is our main groove. We're going to play it about a dozen times in this song. That's not even really an exaggeration. So what do we have going on? Well, the guitar riff is still the main thing, but the bones are doubling it to some extent. Tenors and Barry are playing between the trombone, playing some notes between them, some notes they're accenting with them. They're playing a little bit of the riff. This gives a little bit of propulsion to the groove. Altos and trumpets play the melody, quickly echoed by the tenors and a trombone. Then for the next phrase of the melody, we have the trumpets coming in a little higher while everybody else rings out. Then the saxes finish the melody in octaves, and then they do this little riff here. Let me play it for you. And they're playing it in octaves, but when they get to the last chord, this is a pretty standard thing, pretty cool thing, pretty modern thing. And when I say modern, I mean from like the 1960s. But what we have here is we have a D7 altered chord. We have the guide tones at the bottom of the voicing, the F sharp and the C. Then we have an E flat, B flat, and F. Those are voiced in fourths. You also get a fourth here between the F and the C. They call it a quartal voicing. This works really well on a note that's a little longer. It has a really open sound without sounding too crunchy. Okay, now we're in the melody. This is the first time we're playing the actual melody. So what do we have going on here? Well, first let's listen to it. Okay, I give the bones the melody because sometimes if I don't include the bones early in a chart, we get to the end of the chart and there's no place for them to really punch through. So I like to take care of it early. Bass bones are still hitting those low Gs. Altos are playing the chromatic cliche line. Then they do a little, what would you call this? It's just a little segue into the 4 chord. Throughout this chart, when we get to the 4 chord, the melody switches to another instrument group before returning back to the whoever started it. So you can see right here, measure 17 looks a lot like measure 23. So let me just play you the horns here, the trombones and the saxes. And what's interesting is there's no real harmony here, right? You have this single line and you have them playing the melody, but it almost sounds like chords. And the reason for that is, well, the trombones are playing an arpeggio for the most part, even though it's the melody. And then the saxes are filling in this important chord tone. You end up with a lot of harmony without actually voicing out chords. And it really is one of those less is more kind of situations, because I don't think you can hear this and not understand that it's a minor chord or even a minor chord with a major 7. Then at this point, The trumpets and the saxes take the melody. It's really the trumpets are taking the melody, and they're supported here by the saxes. In between the lines, we have this rapid 16th note figure by the trombones. This is like a call and response. The third bone and the second bone look like they're reversed for some reason, but what you see at the top of the voicing is an E flat and a D natural. That gives it a very interesting rub that is pretty cool. You see a half note interval in the middle of a voicing often, but at the top is a little bit uncommon unless you're going for this effect, and that's what we're doing here. So let me just play this bar. I want to take a moment to discuss voicing and something that might be confusing people. When I talk to people who are getting into big band arranging, a lot of time they're asking me about voicing. And what I start to understand is they aren't asking me about voicings. They're not saying what note, okay, it's an F, what note should come underneath it and underneath that. That is something you can learn, and there's a bunch of techniques, but once you understand those, it's not infinite. Once you understand that, you'll start to recognize what's available to you, whether it's closed voicings, trumpets and trombones doubled an octave apart, quartal voicings, triads on top with tight voicings underneath it, triads on top with open voicings underneath it. The voicings themselves are more dictated by what you're trying to accomplish. But I think what people want to know are, what notes are you putting in there? And more specifically, what they want to know is, how are you harmonizing this melody? They're not really concerned with the voicings of how the notes are stacked together. They just want to know what chords are you playing here? Something that I think quite a bit about. So here we are, we're in C minor, and our melody is an F. So what chord can you put here that works with the C minor that has the F in it? Well, you could say a C minor 11. And that's not a bad choice. But the problem with that is then all the voicings in the chord are just different variations of your C minor. There's no real change in the harmonic structure in the measure. And that change is what make things sound like big band. You don't want to just always be inverting the chord and adding extensions to the top of it. That can work in some situations, but that's not going to give you that sound that I think you are trying to achieve. So what we do is we have to find, for the non-chord tones, we have to find chords that work well in a given situation. So what I did for the F is I harmonized it as a G minor 7. A lot of times on minor chords, I look for, and this is mostly on minor chords, a lot of times on minor chords, I look for a triad a whole step below. So if we're in C minor, I look for the B flat major triad as a way to play some of the non-chord tones, because that just sounds really nice, because it gives it a suspended sound, and it plays over the C minor in a way where the rhythm section doesn't need to know that you're doing it. It's just a natural move that you would do. Maybe even somebody on guitar would just naturally be doing that, or on piano. So it works really well. So in a measure of C minor, you could probably, just by using the C minor and a B flat triad, you could probably harmonize almost any note. And then I added the G because that works too, because the G obviously is going to work with the C. Now, what other chords could work here? Well, maybe an F7, maybe even an F minor or an F major or an F6. That could work. It would be a different sound. Now, normally a chord that is available to you, if you're harmonizing something in C minor, now usually a chord that you can use is the 5 chord, the G7. When I say you can use it, what I mean is you can just use it without the rhythm section having to change to that chord. But I went for the minor 7 for the reasons I already discussed. But the reason I definitely would not use the G7 is because the G7 would have a B natural here instead of the B flat. Because of how these chords are moving, that B natural in the melody that comes in on the and of 2 is so important that if we had a B natural here, it would almost sound like there's no change, and we'd be giving away the B natural a little bit too early. So I think that was a really good choice to use the G minor 7 here. Also, a G7 might not sound great on such a strong beat. You'll see a lot of these chords that we're talking about between the notes. You don't see them on such strong beats like that. It's not that it doesn't work, but it definitely changes it. It's more exposed. Okay, so then we come back, and the Trombones are playing the melody, back to the line cliche up here. We end this phrase on the end of 4 on an A-flat 7 sharp 11. This chord is sort of serving as a 5 chord to the G minor. The 5 chord to the G minor is the D7, but the A-flat 7 is a tritone substitution, as they call it, and it works perfectly. The only thing is, you usually see it preceding the G minor. You don't usually go up a half step to this chord. This one makes it a little surprising. What we do is we stop on the end of 4, then the bones play the riff, and then on the end of 4 over here, we switch to the D7, which actually now sounds like a different chord because we allowed this space in between it and the stop time in the rhythm section. Then the saxophones play the riff and we're back into the main groove. Let me just play you what this sounds like. And I think the thing I want you to really notice is that this A-flat 7 and this D7 over here are essentially the same chord, but they sound different because of the space. We're back into the main groove. Let's just take a little listen to it. Okay, so now everything is just about the same here. We have these little rhythmic variations. They just add a little bit of richness and depth to the arrangement. They're not necessarily heard, but they are just contributing to the groove and also showing that the arrangement is in fact evolving. It's not just a cut and paste thing. The trumpets play this line here. I think I got a little too clever at this point. I tried to do what I call an orchestrated accent, where I just have some instruments playing certain notes. I don't know if it really works. I think maybe just putting an accent on the end of 2 over there would have been just as good. Now we go up to this chord again over here, this quartal voicing. And then we have a measure of 2. This is just another way that I use the meter to keep the listener a little off balance. They're expecting it to go to 4 beats. It only goes to 2. It also just sounded natural to me. You know, sometimes you get to the end of a phrase and it sounds like there should be a 4-bar turnaround to get into the next section. And I just get a little impatient. So I'll just cut the measure in half. Okay, now we play the melody again. Let's give it a listen. What's happening here is the saxes are playing the melody in octaves, and we have some of the trombones playing that line cliche. And look, they're doing that exact little run up into the 4 chord. Over here, we have all the brass playing this melody in octaves with a couple notes added. Then the altos do a chromatic run into a trill. And then I change a few things here. First of all, I pound out these quarter note triplets, and I change the chords. I make it a B-flat 7 to an A-flat. I'm kind of analyzing this on the fly here. Is an A-flat 7 with a sharp 9. Now, what's going on here is, let's just listen to that in Sibelius. So again, it's very surprising. This part gets very loud for a measure. We hit this rhythm over here that's a little disorienting. It just sounds like something's happening. As you're listening to it, you're thinking if this was scored to something weird just happened. Because we have the trumpets playing this melody in octaves and trombone 1 is supporting it down the octave, it does look a little weird to have this B natural and this C here, but when you understand the context, it makes perfect sense. These are playing the chord tones, and the melody just happens to go to the B natural. Okay, this time when we come out of here, remember before we went to that A-flat 7 and then the D and then we went in. Now this time I'm doing that thing again where I'm playing with the length, playing with your expectation a little bit. This time I add an extra measure. I think I told you that this is basically a 12-bar blues, but every time we play this A section, it's never 12 bars. It's 10, it's 11, it's 13. That's the idea, just always upsetting your expectation. So what happens here is we end on a D7 altered chord. We move to an E-flat 7 sharp 9, and then to an E minor 11, to an A7 sharp 5, to the D7. It's kind of a long way around the block to start on a D and end up on a D. But I do this a lot where when I want things to sound a little weird, I move them up by a half step. It's just so not what our ears want to hear. Seems to always work. Maybe I even do it a little too much. Okay, we're back in the main groove. Let's take a look at this. Trumpets do a run up into this little melody. Everything else is basically the same, except we have this melody that gets echoed by the trumpets 2 and 4 and then by the trombones. Let's listen to that. This is kind of funny. This little herky-jerky, ricky-ticky 16th note figure, again, just messes with your senses a little bit. You can see it doesn't really line up with what else is going on, and it's just weird. And then we land on the drums set up, the swing section. If you're enjoying this video but want to go even deeper into the score, you may want to check out my Spider-Man Score Analysis Pack. You get the PDF concert score, as well as a color-coded, marked up, and annotated version. This version of the score has tons of insights into how I put this crazy arrangement together. But what really makes the Score Analysis Pack an incredible value is the audio files. By not just giving you the full mix to listen to, I provide you with mix minus horns, just horns, and individual track stems. With these audio files, you can not just hear what the horn sections sound like, but understand how they're contributing to the overall arrangement. But even more importantly, I include Logic and MIDI files for the song. By loading either of these into your digital audio workstation, you'll be able to non-linearly jump around the arrangement. All the bar numbers, tempo and meter changes, and even section markers are embedded in these files. Now you're able to explore the chart, loop the sections, mute and solo the individual horn sections. There's really no limit. By submerging yourself in the chart this way, you simultaneously train your ears and your brain to understand key arranging concepts. If this sounds like something you'd like to have, check out the links in the description or head over to davidricard.com.